the 19-year old alien princess shamed the human, so he turned and departed without a word. Best HFY stories on the dusty, rugged planet of Voria, where the wild frontier clashed with alien cultures. A lone cowboy named Gage Travers rode into a small, isolated settlement. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden hue over the cracked earth, the air thick with the scent of dust and burning metal. Gage's boots kicked up the dirt as he guided his horse into the settlement, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings. He had been to many places like this before. Outposts on the edge of the galaxy, forgotten by most, but alive with those who had nowhere else to go. Gage was a man of few words, his life defined by long rides across dangerous lands, scraping by in the harshest environments. His hands were calloused from years of hard work, his face weathered from the sun and the life he had chosen. He didn't trust easily, especially not royalty or those who used their power to control others. But something about Voria felt different. As Gage steered his horse into the town square, he noticed a crowd gathered in front of a grand structure that seemed out of place among the humble buildings. The structure was made of sleek, alien metal, its curves shining under the fading sun. He couldn't help but stare at it. This was no ordinary place. At the center of the crowd stood a figure, tall and graceful, radiating an energy that seemed to push the air itself aside. The figure was a woman, though not like any woman Gage had ever seen. Her skin was a pale silvery blue, and her long hair shimmered like strands of liquid light, flowing behind her like a cloak. Her eyes, large and dark, seemed to pierce through the crowd, taking in everything around her. She was an alien, one of the rare beings who ruled this planet, a princess. The people around her were not just ordinary settlers. They were part of her court, her subjects, and they looked up to her with a mix of reverence and fear. Her name, Gage would soon learn, was Xyrathal, the 19-year-old heir to the Voria throne. Gage's horse stomped the ground, and the noise caught Zyra's attention. She turned, her gaze locking onto him instantly, and in that moment Gage felt a strange pull, like something beyond his control. Her eyes seemed to see through him, peeling away the layers of his past, of his thoughts, and it left him uncomfortable. He had faced countless dangers before, but none that could dig so deep into his mind without him even lifting a finger. Zyra raised a hand, signaling the crowd to quiet down. Her voice, when she spoke, was not just heard but felt, like a vibration running through the very air itself. "You there, the one who hides beneath a cowboy's hat?" she called out to Gage, her tone both amused and condescending. "What is it that you seek on Voria?" Gage didn't answer right away. He wasn't used to being called out in front of a crowd, let alone by someone who appeared so powerful, so far above him in status. He wasn't here to impress anyone, least of all an alien princess, but something in her gaze made him feel small, like a bug caught in a web. "I'm just passing through," he finally said, his voice rough but steady. "Looking for work." Zyra's smile was small, almost imperceptible, but it carried a weight that made Gage uneasy. She stepped closer, her long, graceful steps making no sound on the ground. Her presence felt like a force, an invisible pressure that made it hard for him to breathe. "Work, you say?" she mused, her eyes narrowing. "Tell me, cowboy, what is it that a man like you can offer to a planet like this?" Gage stood firm, refusing to let his unease show. He had faced down raiders, bounty hunters, and even the harshest of storms. But Zyra was something different, something more than he had ever encountered, and yet he refused to be intimidated. "I've worked in every kind of place. I've tamed wild lands, fought off threats, and earned my keep. I don't need you to tell me what I can or can't do." Zyra chuckled, but it wasn't a kind laugh. It was sharp, like a blade slicing through the air. "You believe you are capable, don't you? But tell me, cowboy, how many of your kind have come to this planet only to be swallowed by it? How many have thought they could survive here, only to find their hearts broken, their pride shattered?" Gage felt a flicker of something deep inside him. Anger, perhaps, or maybe something more primal, a sense of survival that had always guided him. But before he could respond, Zyra stepped forward again, closing the distance between them, and her eyes seemed to shift. Without warning, she reached out with her mind, a subtle, invisible force that Gage could feel pressing against him. Her telepathic power dug into his thoughts, pulling out memories and fears that he had buried deep. Gage's breath caught in his throat as visions of his past flashed before him, of a brother lost in a war, of relationships ruined by his own inability to connect, of a man who had always been alone. It was as if Zyra could see everything, every dark corner of his soul laid bare. The alien princess reveled in his discomfort, a cruel glint in her eyes. She wasn't just reading his mind. She was playing with it, bending it to her will. "You've seen loss, haven't you, cowboy?" Zyra's voice echoed in his head, her words far more invasive than any physical touch. "You've walked a path of loneliness, where every step is a reminder of what you've lost, and still you refuse to face it."
"I refuse to confront your weakness."
Gage's hands tightened around the reins of his horse, the anger rising in his chest like a storm. This was more than a test of strength, this was a test of his very spirit. He wasn't going to let her win. He wasn't going to let some alien princess mock him and pry into his most painful memories without a fight. Without a word, Gage turned his horse around. The crowd watched in stunned silence as he began to ride away, his head held high despite the deep sting in his chest. Zyra's laughter followed him, lingering in the air like the echo of a distant thunderstorm. As Gage rode out of the settlement, the weight of her gaze still pressed against him. He had left without saying a word, but inside he knew this wasn't over. The princess had shamed him, but she had also awakened something in him, something he couldn't ignore. Gage Travers rode through the open plains of Voria, his thoughts clouded by what had happened back in the settlement. The harsh winds of the frontier planet blew across the barren landscape, and the only sound was the rhythmic thud of his horse's hooves. His chest tightened, and his mind replayed the moment when Zyrathal, the alien princess, had so easily torn through the layers of his pride. He had been humiliated in front of the crowd. Her words, sharp and biting, still echoed in his head. He had spent most of his life avoiding attachment, keeping to himself and the rugged world he knew, but in that moment he had felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he never had before. The memory of her laughter still stung. It was a laugh filled with power, and something about it made Gage feel small. But Gage wasn't the kind of man to stay down for long. The feeling of vulnerability lingered like an ache, and the more he thought about it, the more determined he became to find Zyra and confront her again. He couldn't let this go. He had to prove that he wasn't just a simple cowboy, that he wasn't some easy target for a princess from another world. His pride demanded it. He guided his horse through the rocky terrain toward the distant hills, where he had heard Zyra's royal palace stood. It was said to be a place of wonder, built from alien materials so advanced that no human could even begin to understand how it was constructed. The princess, a leader among her people, had been known for her beauty, her powers, and her arrogance. But Gage wasn't afraid of arrogance. In fact, he had faced down more dangerous opponents, from ruthless bounty hunters to savage creatures, and walked away unscathed. But Zyra was different. She wasn't just a physical opponent. She had powers he didn't understand, and that made her dangerous in ways he hadn't fully grasped. He had to know more, understand why she had treated him the way she did. By the time Gage reached the palace, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the land. The palace gleamed in the fading light, its curved walls shimmering like silver. There was something majestic about it, but Gage felt only coldness when he looked at it. It wasn't just the building that felt imposing. It was the presence that came with it. Zyra's presence. He dismounted his horse and walked toward the grand entrance. Two tall guards stood by the gate, their expressions unreadable as they observed Gage's approach. They were tall, muscular, and wore intricate armor that glowed faintly in the twilight. They didn't speak, but one of them raised an eyebrow as Gage came closer. "I'm here to see the princess," Gage said, his voice steady but filled with quiet resolve. "I need to speak with her." The guard didn't move at first, but then he nodded. "Wait here." He turned and entered the palace, leaving Gage standing alone outside. Gage glanced around at the vast, strange architecture of the palace. The design was unlike anything he had ever seen. It felt both alien and ancient, as though it had been standing long before the first human settlers arrived on Voria. The air around him felt charged, as though the very atmosphere was alive with the energy of the place. Moments later, the guard returned and gestured for Gage to follow. The interior of the palace was as breathtaking as the outside. The walls shimmered with a strange, soft light, and the floors were made of smooth, polished stone. It was unlike any place Gage had ever set foot in, elegant yet cold and sterile, as though the beauty of the place was meant to intimidate, not invite. They moved through the corridors, passing rooms filled with alien artifacts and strange technologies that Gage couldn't begin to comprehend. Eventually they arrived at a large chamber where Zyra stood, her figure illuminated by the soft glow of an artificial light. She was alone, standing in the center of the room, her long silver-blue hair cascading down her back like a flowing river. Zyra turned as Gage entered, and her eyes met his with that same piercing intensity that had unsettled him before. She didn't speak at first. Instead, she studied him as if trying to decipher his every move, every thought. Gage held her gaze, refusing to look away, his determination written all over his face. You returned, Zyra said finally, her voice as smooth and cold as the walls around them. I wondered if you would. I'm here to settle things, Gage replied, his voice low but firm. You made your point earlier, but I'm not someone who backs down easily. Zyra smiled, though there was no warmth in it. You think you can stand against me, cowboy? You think your pride is worth more than your survival? Gage stepped forward, not backing down. It's not about survival. It's about respect. You humiliated me in front of those people, and I won't let that slide. I'm not afraid of you, Zyra. I've faced worse things than your mind games. Zyra's eyes flashed, a hint of amusement in her gaze. You think I played with you? No, Gage. I showed you the truth. You walk around with the weight of your past hanging over you. You think you can outrun it, but I see it. I see the man you are and the man you try so hard to be. Gage's fists clenched at his sides. She was right about one thing. His past was a heavy burden, one he carried with him every day. But she couldn't know that, couldn't understand the struggles he had faced. I don't need your pity, Gage spat, his anger rising. I'm here because I want to prove that I'm not just some simple man you can manipulate with your powers. You don't know me? Zyra tilted her head slightly, as if considering his words. I don't pity you, Gage. I merely see you for what you are, a man who has fought and survived, but who is lost within himself. You run from your past because you fear it, but in doing so, you refuse to face the truth. Gage didn't know how to respond. She had laid his soul bare, exposed his deepest fears, but he wouldn't give her the satisfaction of admitting it. He couldn't. He had built his life around surviving, and to let anyone, especially someone like her, break that down was unthinkable. Without another word, Gage turned and walked toward the door. I don't need your truth. I need my own. As he left the palace, his heart was heavier than it had been before. Zyra had won in a way, but Gage wasn't ready to accept it. He would face whatever came next, but he would do it on his own terms. One thing was certain, he wouldn't forget this encounter, and he would make sure Zyra remembered the cowboy who didn't bow to anyone, not even a princess. Gage Travers rode back into the settlement, his mind swirling with thoughts of what had happened at the palace. Zyra had gotten under his skin more than he cared to admit. She had read him like an open book, seeing the cracks in his tough exterior. Her words, her powers, they all lingered in his mind, gnawing at him. Gage wasn't one to back down, but there was a feeling that had been planted deep inside him, one he couldn't shake. Something had shifted, and it made him uneasy. He knew he had to face her again, not just to settle the score, but to prove to himself that he wasn't just some pawn in her game. He had to show her that, despite everything, he was still in control. His pride demanded it. The sun hung low as Gage approached the Grand Palace once again. This time his resolve was stronger, his steps purposeful. He wasn't going to just walk away. He had come to challenge Zyra, not just with his strength, but with his will. The guards didn't stop him this time. They recognized the fire in his eyes and silently stepped aside as he entered the palace. The interior was as grand as it had been before, cold, beautiful, and unsettling in its perfection. As Gage moved through the corridors, he couldn't help but feel small in such a vast place. It was as though the palace itself was a reminder of everything he wasn't, everything that Zyra was. When he reached the chamber where Zyra had awaited him the last time, she stood there again, as if she had been expecting him. Her regal figure was lit by the soft light that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. She didn't speak, but her gaze met his with a knowing look. Gage didn't wait for her to say anything. I'm not here for words anymore, he said firmly. You've proven that you can read me, manipulate me, but I'm not here to be your subject or your plaything. I'm here to challenge you. Zyra's lips curled into a small, almost sad smile. You think you can challenge me? You still don't understand, do you, Gage? You can't defeat what you don't fully comprehend. Gage stood tall, his fists clenched at his sides. Then teach me. Show me just how powerful you really are. Zyra raised an eyebrow, her expression unreadable. Very well. If it's a challenge you want, a challenge you shall have. But be warned, Gage, this is not just a duel of strength. It is a battle of wills. Before Gage could react, she stepped forward. In a flash, her power reached out to him, probing his mind with the same intensity as before. He gritted his teeth and fought against it, refusing to let her gain control. But the pressure was immense, and it felt like something was pulling at him from the inside. Her voice echoed in his head. You believe you can fight me, but you're weak. Your mind is fractured, full of doubts. You'll never be whole, never be free, until you accept your past. Gage shook his head, refusing to give in. You don't know me. You don't know what I've survived. "Oh, I know," she replied, her voice laced with mock sympathy. "You spent your life running from the truth, hiding behind your pride, but deep down you know that I am right." The pressure in his mind intensified, and Gage's vision blurred. He could feel his anger rising, but more than that, he felt a deep sense of fear, a fear he had buried long ago, the fear of confronting his past, the fear of failure, the fear of being alone. Zyra's words cut through his defenses. "You're afraid, Gage, afraid to admit that everything you've done, everything you've fought for, has been in vain. You've lost more than you realize." Gage's breath came faster, his heart pounding in his chest. But then something inside him clicked. The fear, the doubts, they didn't define him. He had survived so much, faced so many battles, and here he was standing before this alien princess still fighting. That was who he was. With a burst of determination, Gage pushed back against Zyra's mental grip. He could feel her power, but he refused to let it break him. His mind was his own, and he wouldn't let her take it from him. Zyra's expression shifted from amusement to something more intrigued. "You're stronger than I thought," she said softly, her power withdrawing just enough for Gage to regain his focus. "But you're still not ready for what comes next." Gage didn't hesitate. Without warning, he drew his revolver and aimed it at her, his hand steady despite the adrenaline surging through his veins. "If you want a battle of wills, let's make it a real fight." Zyra's eyes sparkled with curiosity, but she made no move to defend herself. Instead, she raised a hand, and a shimmering shield of energy appeared around her, deflecting the bullet Gage fired. The shot ricocheted off the shield and embedded itself in the wall behind her. "You think a weapon can stop me?" Zyra's voice was filled with amusement. "You can't defeat what you can't even touch." Gage gritted his teeth. He knew that in terms of power he was no match for her. But this wasn't about power. This was about resolve. It was about standing his ground and refusing to be beaten down, whether by her mind games or by anything else. With a sharp motion, Gage holstered his gun and charged at her, closing the distance between them. Zyra's shield flickered, but she didn't move. Gage collided with the shield, but instead of bouncing off, he used his momentum to roll to the side, narrowly avoiding her counterattack. He grabbed a nearby metal pole and swung it at her, but she deflected it with ease, her telekinetic powers sending it crashing into the far wall. "You're persistent," she said, a hint of respect in her voice. "But it won't be enough." Gage panted, sweat dripping down his face. His heart was racing, but he wasn't about to give up. He wasn't just fighting her. He was fighting himself. He was fighting the fear that had always held him back, the fear of confronting his weaknesses. Zyra's eyes softened for a moment, but then she took a step forward, her energy rising. "You're close, Gage. Close to understanding. But you're still not there. You still haven't accepted that you are not the man you think you are." "I am who I choose to be," Gage shot back. "And I'm not going to let you control me." Zyra paused, then lowered her hand. The shield around her faded. For a moment, there was only silence between them. Gage stood, breathing heavily, his body aching from the exertion. Zyra regarded him thoughtfully, as if seeing something in him that she hadn't expected. "You've earned my respect, Gage," she said quietly, her voice softer than before. "You may not have won this fight, but you've shown me something I didn't expect. Strength, willpower, and the courage to face your own demons." Gage didn't reply. He wasn't here for her approval. He was here for his own peace, for the chance to prove that he could stand tall, no matter the odds. Zyra gave him one last look, and for the first time her expression softened. "Perhaps there is more to you than I realized." Without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving Gage standing alone in the chamber. He stood there for a moment, catching his breath, before turning and walking toward the exit. He hadn't defeated Zyra, but he had defeated something much more important, his own fear, and that was enough. The moon hung high above Voria, casting a cold light over the barren landscape. Gage Travers stood outside the palace, his heart still racing from the intense encounter inside. His hands, though steady, ached from the strain of fighting Zyra's mind games and her overwhelming power. He had faced off against her, shown his resolve, but now, standing in the quiet of the night, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, something he didn't quite understand. Zyra had given him no easy victory, and though he had walked away without yielding, he couldn't deny that she had tested him in ways no one ever had before. His past, his fears, his doubts, they had all been laid bare by her. And though he had pushed back, though he had fought for his pride, there was still a part of him that wondered if he was truly free. He glanced back at the palace. Its towering structure loomed over him, an imposing reminder of what he had just confronted. It wasn't just a building. It was a symbol of everything Zyra was, everything he wasn't. But Gage had realized something important over the past few days. It wasn't about defeating her or even gaining her respect. It was about standing his ground, about proving to himself that he wasn't just another lost soul wandering through the galaxy. He wasn't just a cowboy, a man with no future. He had a purpose, and that purpose was his own. He turned his horse around, preparing to leave Voria behind. There was nothing more for him here. No matter how powerful Zyra was, no matter how deep her abilities went, he knew that he couldn't stay and continue to let her challenge him. The battle for his pride had been fought, and the victory, small as it was his. As Gage rode away, his mind drifted to the moments they had shared, the things she had said. Zyra's words had cut deep, but in some strange way, they had also helped him realize something about himself. He had always been a man of action, a man who solved problems with his hands, with his skills. But Zyra had forced him to face something far more difficult, his own mind, his own heart. Out there, on the open plains of Voria, Gage was free. Free from the weight of the past that had burdened him for so long. Free from the doubts that had clouded his judgment. But even as he felt the wind in his hair, the vastness of the land stretching out before him, he couldn't help but feel a sense of finality. He had left a princess behind. But had he truly left her influence behind? Could he really walk away from everything she had shown him about himself? The questions lingered in his mind as he made his way through the rugged terrain, but just as the landscape began to change, becoming more familiar and less foreign, Gage felt a pull, something calling him back. He wasn't sure what it was, but it was strong enough to make him slow his pace, enough to make him stop. He turned his horse around, heading back in the direction of the palace. The thought of Zyra, of what she represented, still gnawed at him. He didn't know why he had returned. Perhaps it was curiosity, or perhaps it was the need to resolve whatever it was that still lingered between them. But whatever it was, he had to face it. As he approached the gates of the palace once more, the guards stood as still as ever, their eyes betraying nothing. Gage dismounted and walked toward the entrance. This time there was no hesitation in his steps. The grand chamber was quiet, the atmosphere heavy with the silence that only the most powerful beings could command. Zyra was standing at the far end of the room, her back to him. The moment he entered, she turned, her expression unreadable. For a long moment neither of them spoke. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with unspoken thoughts and emotions. Finally Gage spoke, his voice steady but softer than before. "I didn't come back to fight you, Zyra. I came back because there's something I need to understand." Zyra's gaze flickered with interest. "And, what is it that you need to understand, Gage?" He took a step forward, his eyes locking with hers. "I came here to prove something to you, to myself. But I realize now that it's not about winning or losing. It's about what I do after. I don't need your respect or your approval, but I can't keep running from what you showed me about myself." Zyra said nothing at first, her eyes studying him carefully, as if weighing his every word. Then slowly she nodded. "I see. You think you have nothing left to prove? That you've won your own battle? But there is one thing you haven't realized yet, Gage. You're not just fighting me. You're fighting yourself." Gage stood still, the weight of her words sinking in. It wasn't just a battle of wills, as she had said. It was a battle of his own identity, his own choices. He had spent so many years running from his past, from the parts of himself he didn't want to face, that he had never truly stopped to consider who he was becoming. "Then why are you still standing here?" Gage asked, his voice quiet but firm. "If you've seen everything about me, if you've shown me everything I need to face, why haven't you finished it? Why haven't you put me in my place?" Zyra took a deep breath and stepped closer to him. "You've already done that yourself. I've shown you the truth, and you've taken it and walked away. That's something not many can do." For a moment, Gage felt a sense of peace wash over him. There was no need for a final confrontation, no need for a winner or a loser. He had come here for answers, and in some strange way, he had found them. Zyra had shown him the path to his own understanding, and it was up to him to walk it. He looked at her one last time, his expression softening. "I think I understand now. I'm not here to be your opponent. I'm here to be me, and that's enough." Zyra regarded him with something like respect. She had seen this before. She knew the strength it took to walk away, to accept one's own limitations. "Very well, Gage. Go. But remember, there are no easy answers on this planet. You must carve your own path." Gage nodded and turned to leave, the weight on his shoulders finally lifting. He wasn't running anymore. He wasn't fighting for anyone's approval. He was simply walking forward, toward whatever came next. As he stepped out of the palace and onto the dusty plains of Voria, Gage felt the quiet hum of the land beneath him. The horizon stretched out before him, vast and endless. He wasn't sure where he was headed, but for the first time in a long while, he didn't need to know. He had proven something to himself, and that was all that mattered. The journey ahead was his to make, and for the first time, Gage Travers felt truly free.